The SWAT team's battering ram splintered Marcus Chen's front door at 5:47 a.m. Automatic weapons trained on a man whose only crime was draining his own swimming pool. But Karen Whitmore wasn't finished. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights orchestrating the perfect revenge, convinced her neighbor was stealing thousands of gallons of city water. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been hiding something far more explosive than water theft, and her vindictive phone call to 911 was about to expose a secret that would destroy everything she'd built in their pristine suburban paradise. The early October sun cast long shadows across Marcus Chen's backyard as he stood at the edge of his kidney-shaped pool, watching the last of the chlorinated water swirl down the drain. The gentle gurgling sound was almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm brewing behind the pristine white fence that separated his property from Karen Whitmore's immaculate lawn. "Daddy, why are we saying goodbye to the pool?" 7-year-old Emma tugged at Marcus's paint-stained workshirt, her dark eyes reflecting the rippling water below. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, his calloused hands gentle on her small shoulders. The past 3 months had aged him beyond his 34 years, the premature grey threading through his black hair, the worry lines etched deeper around his eyes. "Remember when Mommy got sick, sweetheart? We talked about how sometimes we have to make hard choices." Emma nodded solemnly, her fingers tracing the concrete edge where she'd spent countless summer afternoons. "To pay for the medicine." "That's right." Marcus's voice caught slightly. The pool had been Sarah's dream, their dream. They'd saved for 2 years to install it, planning elaborate pool parties and lazy Sunday afternoons. But stage 4 pancreatic cancer didn't care about dreams. The experimental treatment in Houston was their last hope, and it cost more than Marcus made in 2 years as a high school art teacher. The sound of a sliding glass door slamming shut made both father and daughter look up. Karen Whitmore stood on her elevated deck, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair catching the morning light like a beacon of suburban authority. Even at 7 a.m., she wore a crisp white blazer and navy slacks, as if preparing for battle in a boardroom, rather than surveying her kingdom of manicured hedges and geometric flower beds. "Excuse me." Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a serrated knife. "Marcus, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Marcus straightened slowly, instinctively, moving Emma behind him. In the 18 months since the Whitmores had moved in next door, Karen had made it abundantly clear that she considered herself the neighborhood's self-appointed quality control manager. She'd filed complaints about Marcus's slightly overgrown lawn, his daughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, and the way he parked his 10-year-old Honda 2 inches over the property line. "Morning, Karen," Marcus called back, forcing civility into his tone. "Just draining the pool for winter." Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. "In October? Don't insult my intelligence, Marcus. Nobody drains a perfectly good pool in October." She descended her deck steps with military precision, her heels clicking against the wooden planks like a countdown timer. "Where exactly is all that water going?" "Into the storm drain, like it's supposed to." Marcus kept his voice level, though. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Same as everyone else who winterizes their pool." "Winterize?" Karen had reached the fence line now, her manicured fingers gripping the white pickets like prison bars. "That pool is your property's crown jewel. You don't just throw away thousands of gallons of treated water unless—" Her pale blue eyes narrowed with the intensity of a prosecutor who just spotted a crack in the defendant's story. "Unless you're planning to fill it back up with city water." Marcus felt Emma's small hand slip into his, her grip tightening with the anxiety that had become her constant companion since her mother's diagnosis. "Karen, I don't know what you're implying, but—" "I'm not implying anything," Karen interrupted, her voice rising an octave. "I'm stating facts. This is the 3rd time this month I've seen unusual water activity in your yard. The late-night sprinkler systems, the constant pool maintenance, and now this dramatic draining. You're gaming the system, aren't you? Running up your water usage and then claiming some sort of rebate or insurance payout." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been draining the pool at dawn specifically to avoid neighborhood scrutiny, hoping to spare Emma the embarrassment of their financial desperation becoming public knowledge. But Karen had been watching, calculating, building her case like a detective stalking a serial killer. "That's not," Marcus started, but Karen was already pulling out her phone. "I've been documenting everything," she announced with the satisfaction of a hunter who'd just cornered wounded prey. "Photos, water meter readings, timestamps. I know exactly how much water you've been using, and it doesn't add up. Not for a family of 2 in a 3-bedroom house. Emma squeezed Marcus's hand tighter, and he could feel her trembling. The weight of his wife's medical bills, the second mortgage on their house, the careful rationing of groceries and utilities, all of it pressed down on him like a physical force. But Karen's accusation wasn't just wrong. It was cruel in its blindness to their reality. You want to know the truth. Marcus's voice was quiet but carried across the yard with deadly precision. We are selling the house, Karen. The pool's being drained because we can't afford to maintain it anymore. My wife is dying. We've spent our life savings on treatments that insurance won't cover, and we are 3 months behind on the mortgage. The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a house fire. Karen's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been shame. But the moment passed so quickly Marcus wondered if he'd imagined it. That's... Karen's voice was softer now, uncertain. That's terrible about your wife, but it doesn't change the facts. Water theft is water theft, regardless of the circumstances. If everyone in financial trouble decided to steal utilities, where would that leave the rest of us? Marcus stared at her in disbelief. Behind them, the pool continued its steady gurgle toward emptiness, each gallon representing another memory, being drained away. Emma's birthday parties, Sarah's morning laps before chemotherapy, the quiet evenings when they'd float together, planning a future that seemed increasingly impossible. Water theft, Marcus repeated slowly, tasting the words like poison. You think I'm stealing water by draining my own pool on my own property into the city storm system. I think you're running some kind of scam, Karen shot back, her momentary softness evaporating. And I think you're using your family's tragedy to manipulate people into looking the other way. Well, I'm not looking the other way. I'm calling the city utilities department, and if that doesn't work, I'm calling the police. Daddy. Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Is the mean lady going to have us arrested? Marcus looked down at his daughter, this brave little girl who'd spent more time in hospital waiting rooms than playgrounds, who'd learned words like metastasis and prognosis before she could properly tie her shoes. The rage that had been building in his chest crystallized into something cold and purposeful. No, sweetheart, he said quietly, never taking his eyes off Karen. Nobody's getting arrested for taking care of their family. Karen's phone was already at her ear. Yes, I'd like to report suspected water theft in the Willowbrook subdivision. 247 Maple Street. The resident appears to be manipulating his water usage to avoid proper billing. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a fundamental realignment of priorities that had been building since Sarah's first oncology appointment. He'd spent months trying to be the perfect neighbor, the understanding husband, the patient father. He'd absorbed Karen's complaints with grace, endured the insurance company's denials with dignity, and watched his wife waste away while maintaining his composure. But watching this woman turn his family's desperation into her personal crusade, he realized that sometimes dignity was a luxury he couldn't afford. Emma, he said softly, go inside and start your breakfast. Daddy needs to have a grown-up conversation with Mrs. Whitmore. As his daughter reluctantly headed toward the house, Marcus walked to the fence that separated his drowning dreams from Karen's perfect world. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every sleepless night, every rejected insurance claim, every time he'd had to tell his daughter that maybe next year they could afford the things other kids took for granted. You want to call the police? Go ahead. But when they get here, I'm going to tell them about the cameras you've been hiding in your attic window to spy on my family. I'm going to tell them about the anonymous complaints you've been filing with the HOA, trying to get us fined for violations that don't exist. And I'm going to tell them about the for sale signs you keep mysteriously removing from my front yard. Karen's face went white, her phone call forgotten. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Marcus's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. You see, when you're home all day taking care of a dying wife, you notice things. Like how your birdwatching always seems to focus on my windows. Like how the HOA keeps getting complaints about my property on days when I haven't even been home. Like how real estate signs that. The marble countertop of the Whitmore kitchen gleamed under the recessed lighting as Karen paced between the granite island and the Sub-Zero refrigerator, her heels clicking out a staccato rhythm of barely contained fury. The morning's confrontation. With Marcus Chen played on repeat in her mind, each exchange sharpening her rage like a blade against a whetstone. Richard Whitmore looked up from his Wall Street Journal, his steel-grey eyes tracking his wife's agitated movement with the practiced assessment of a federal prosecutor who'd spent 15 years reading body language in courtrooms. At 42, he possessed the kind of austere handsomeness that intimidated defense attorneys and made juries lean forward when he spoke, all sharp angles and controlled intensity wrapped in a $3,000 suit. "You're going to wear a groove in the Italian marble," he observed, his voice carrying the measured cadence he used when cross-examining hostile witnesses. "What's got you so worked up?" Karen stopped pacing and turned to face her husband, her perfectly applied makeup unable to completely mask the flush of anger coloring her cheeks. "That man next door, Marcus Chen. He threatened me, Richard. Actually threatened me on my own property." Richard folded his newspaper with mechanical precision, creating sharp creases that could cut paper. 23 years of marriage had taught him to recognize the particular pitch in Karen's voice that preceded her most elaborate campaigns of neighborhood justice. "Threatened you how?" "He claims he has security footage of me. Says he's going to release it on social media with some sob-story about his sick wife if I don't stop harassing him." Karen's laugh was bitter and sharp, as if holding people accountable for their actions constitutes harassment. "And what actions were you holding him accountable for?" Richard's question carried the weight of a prosecutor who'd learned to extract full confessions through patient interrogation. Karen's pause was almost imperceptible, but Richard caught it, the microsecond hesitation that usually preceded a carefully constructed version of the truth. "Water theft. I've been monitoring his usage patterns, and they're completely inconsistent with normal residential consumption. This morning he drained his entire swimming pool, claiming it was for winterization, but the timing doesn't make sense." Richard set down his coffee cup with the deliberate care of a man who controlled every gesture, every expression, every word that left his mouth. "You've been monitoring his water usage. Someone has to maintain standards in this neighborhood." Karen shot back, her defensive tone confirming Richard's suspicions that there was more to the story. Property values don't protect themselves. When people start cutting corners, when they stop maintaining their homes properly, it affects everyone. "And the security footage he mentioned." Karen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Pure bluff. He's trying to intimidate me because he knows I'm onto him. These people always play the victim when they get caught." Richard's expression didn't change, but something cold and calculating flickered behind his eyes. In federal court, he was known for his ability to dismantle defense arguments with surgical precision, finding the one loose thread that unraveled entire cases. The skill that made him one of the most feared prosecutors in the district was the same one that made him exceptionally dangerous when someone threatened his family. "These people," he repeated quietly. "You mean financially desperate people? Or did you have something else in mind?" Karen's face flushed deeper. "I meant people who think they can manipulate the system and hide behind sob stories. His wife's illness is tragic, but it doesn't give him the right to steal municipal resources." Richard stood slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding with predatory grace. He walked to the window that overlooked the Chen property, studying the empty pool that gleamed like a concrete wound in the morning sun. "Tell me exactly what you observed." "Excessive water usage over the past 3 months. Late-night sprinkler activity. Multiple pool maintenance visits. And this morning, draining thousands of gallons of treated water directly into the storm system." Karen joined him at the window, her voice gaining strength as she recited her catalogue of perceived violations. "It's clearly part of some insurance scam or utilities fraud." "And what did you do with these observations?" "I documented everything. Photos, timestamps, meter readings. I was planning to file a complaint with the utilities department when he started making threats." Richard nodded slowly, his mind already working through the legal frameworks that could transform a neighbor dispute into something far more serious. "Show me the documentation." Karen led him to her home office, a shrine to organization that would have impressed the Pentagon. Color-coded filing systems lined the walls, and a massive desk held 3 computer monitors displaying spreadsheets that tracked everything from neighborhood property values to municipal service response times. She pulled up a folder labeled 247 Maple Street, with the efficiency of a prosecutor accessing case files. Richard studied the photographs and data with the same intensity he brought to federal investigations. Images of Marcus Chen's backyard at various times of day and night. Water meter readings transcribed with obsessive precision. Detailed notes about visitors, service calls, and maintenance activities. The thoroughness was impressive, and potentially criminal. How did you obtain the meter readings? Richard asked quietly. The meters are public property, Karen replied, but there was a defensive edge to her voice. Anyone can read them. From the street, yes, but these appear to have been taken from inside the Chen's backyard. Richard's tone remained neutral, but Karen could hear the prosecutor emerging beneath the husband. Some of these photos show angles that would require trespassing. I was being thorough. You were committing multiple felonies. Richard's voice cut through her explanation like a scalpel. Stalking, harassment, criminal trespass, possibly breaking and entering if you access their property for these meter readings. Karen's confidence cracked slightly. I was protecting our neighborhood, our investment. You were creating evidence that could destroy us both. Richard turned from the computer screen to face his wife, and for the first time in their conversation, his prosecutorial mask slipped to reveal something much more dangerous. Do you have any idea what happens to a federal prosecutor whose wife is convicted of stalking and harassment? What that does to cases I've spent years building? The question hung in the air like a blade. Karen had seen Richard's career consume. Defense attorneys, turning their strongest arguments into rubble. But she'd never considered how that same ruthless efficiency might be turned on problems closer to home. Then we need to make sure it never comes to that, she said quietly. We need to neutralize the threat before it can damage us. Richard studied his wife's face with the same clinical detachment he used to evaluate defendants. The woman he'd married had been ambitious, organized, and fiercely protective of her family status. But over the years, those qualities had metastasized into something darker, a need to control every variable in their carefully constructed life. What exactly are you suggesting? Karen moved to another filing cabinet, retrieving a folder that was noticeably thicker than the others. Marcus Chen isn't just a desperate husband and father. I've done extensive research on his background, and there are irregularities. She spread documents across the desk like a poker player revealing a winning hand. Financial records obtained through questionable means. Employment history that showed suspicious gaps. Immigration documents that raise questions about timing and sponsorship. He's been in this country for 15 years, but his path to citizenship was unusually expedited. His wife's medical treatments are being partially funded by a charitable organization that has connections to several groups currently under federal investigation for money laundering. Karen's voice gained strength as she built her case, and his teaching position at Westfield High gives him access to hundreds of minors with minimal background screening. Richard examined the documents with growing unease. The information was detailed, comprehensive, and completely illegal to obtain. Karen, where did you get this? I have friends in various departments, people who understand the importance of community safety. Her smile was sharp and satisfied. The point is, Marcus Chen has vulnerabilities, significant ones. If he tries to play his little social media game, we can destroy him completely. The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of Karen's computers and the distant sound of children playing in the neighborhood that had become their battlefield. Richard stared at the illegally obtained documents spread across his wife's desk, recognizing the moment when a simple neighbor dispute had evolved into something that could end careers, destroy lives, and potentially land them both in federal prison. You realize what you're describing is blackmail, he said quietly. Conspiracy. Abuse of power. If anyone discovers we have this information, let alone how we obtained it. They won't, Karen interrupted, her voice filled with the confidence of someone who'd been winning small battles for so long she'd forgotten they were part of a larger war. Because Marcus Chen is going to withdraw his threats, sell his house quietly, and disappear from our lives. And if he doesn't... She gestured to the files scattered across her desk. Well, federal prosecutors, huh? Marcus Chen sat in his darkened living room at 2:17 a.m., illuminated only by the pale glow of his laptop screen. The house around him was tomb quiet except for the steady hum of Sarah's oxygen concentrator upstairs and the occasional creak of settling wood. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. His attention was completely absorbed by the audio file that had been automatically uploaded from the recording device he'd hidden in the Whitmore's hedge 3 days earlier. The conversation between Karen and her husband played through his headphones with crystal clarity, each word hitting him like a physical blow. Federal prosecutor. Illegal surveillance. Blackmail. The casual discussion of destroying his family. To protect their pristine suburban facade made his hands shake with a rage so pure it felt like electricity in his veins. Federal prosecutors have tremendous discretion about which cases they choose to pursue. Marcus rewound the audio for the fourth time, his finger hovering over the play button as he tried to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. Karen wasn't just a busybody neighbor with too much time. She was married to a federal prosecutor who was willing to abuse his power to destroy anyone who threatened their carefully constructed world. The soft whisper of footsteps on the stairs made him slam the laptop shut. Emma appeared in the doorway, her small frame wrapped in the pink unicorn pajamas that Sarah had bought her before the last round of chemo. Her dark hair was disheveled from sleep, but her eyes were alert with the hyper-awareness that had become her constant companion since her mother's illness. "Daddy." "I heard voices," she said quietly, padding across the hardwood floor on bare feet. "Is Mommy okay?" Marcus pulled his daughter onto his lap, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Mommy's sleeping, sweetheart." The voices were from my computer. "I was working on something." Emma studied his face with the unsettling perceptiveness of a child who'd spent too much time around adults discussing life and death decisions. "You look scared." The simple observation cut through Marcus's attempt at normalcy like a knife. He was scared, terrified, actually, not of Karen's threats, or her husband's federal connections, but of what he was capable of doing to protect his family. The recording in his laptop represented nuclear-level ammunition in their suburban Cold War, but using it would require crossing lines he'd never imagined approaching. "Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with complicated problems," he said carefully. "But you don't need to worry about it. That's my job." "Is it about the mean lady next door?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a child who'd overheard more adult conversations than she should have. "I saw her and the man looking at our house this morning. They looked angry." Marcus felt his chest tighten. His 7-year-old daughter shouldn't have to live in fear of her neighbors, shouldn't have to parse the facial expressions of adults who viewed her family as obstacles to their perfect life. But Sarah's illness had stolen so much from Emma already. Her carefree childhood, her mother's energy, her sense of security in the world. "What did you see, exactly?" he asked gently. They were standing by their window, pointing at our house and talking. The man looked. Emma paused, searching for words to describe something beyond her vocabulary. "Like the doctors when they told us about Mommy. Like they were planning something bad." The innocent observation hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. His daughter had learned to read the expressions of people who held power over her family's fate, medical professionals, insurance adjusters, and now federal prosecutors who saw her mother's suffering as an inconvenience to their property values. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, lifting her chin so he could look directly into her eyes. "If anyone comes to our house, police, government people, anyone in uniform, you tell them you want to call your daddy before you say anything else, even if they say I'm in trouble or they just want to ask questions. Can you remember that?" Emma nodded solemnly, her small face serious with the gravity of adult responsibilities that should have been years away. "Are we in trouble, Daddy?" Marcus pulled her closer, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. The recording on his laptop could destroy the Whitmores completely, end Richard's career, expose Karen's illegal surveillance, and turn them from suburban royalty into federal defendants. But it would also paint a target on his family's back, invite scrutiny from law enforcement agencies, and potentially expose Emma to retribution from people with resources and connections. He couldn't match. "We are going to be okay," he said quietly, making a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "But we might have to be very brave for a little while." After tucking Emma back into bed, Marcus returned to his laptop and the recording that had become both his salvation and his potential destruction. He opened a new browser window and began researching federal prosecutors, misconduct cases, and the bureaucratic machinery that protected or destroyed government officials who abused their power. What he found wasn't encouraging. Richard Whitmore wasn't just any federal prosecutor. He was the lead attorney on several high-profile organized crime cases, with connections throughout the Department of Justice and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Taking him down would require more than a single recording. It would require perfect timing, irrefutable evidence, and allies with the power to challenge federal authority. Marcus opened another window and began typing an email to the one person he knew with both the connections and the motivation to take on a corrupt federal prosecutor, Jennifer Martinez, an investigative journalist who'd built her career exposing government corruption and who'd lost her own brother to prosecutorial misconduct 5 years earlier. The cursor blinked in the empty message field as Marcus tried to find words for a situation that seemed pulled from a paranoid thriller rather than suburban reality. How did you explain that your neighbor's husband was threatening to use federal resources to destroy your family because you drained your swimming pool? His phone buzzed with a text message, the sound sharp in the pre-dawn silence. Unknown number. Check your front door. Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. He crept to the living room window and peered through the blinds at his front porch. A manila envelope sat on his doormat, innocuous as a morning newspaper but infinitely more threatening given the timing. He waited 20 minutes, watching for any sign of movement in the Whitmore house or the surrounding neighborhood. When he was satisfied that no one was watching, he opened his front door just wide enough to grab the envelope and retreated back. Inside, the contents made his blood turn to liquid nitrogen. Photocopies of his and Sarah's tax returns from the previous 3 years. Bank statements showing their mounting medical debt. Employment records from Westfield High School, including disciplinary actions that had been expunged from his official file. Most devastating of all, immigration documents that showed discrepancies in his original visa application from 15 years earlier. Technical violations that could be used to question his citizenship status and, by extension, his right to custody of Emma. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the documents. Your move, Mr. Chen. But consider the consequences carefully. Some games have rules that favor the house. Marcus stared at the papers spread across his coffee table, recognizing the sophistication of the intelligence gathering and the implicit threat contained in every document. The Whitmores hadn't just been watching his house, they'd been conducting a comprehensive background investigation using resources that should have been reserved for federal criminals. But as he studied the immigration documents more closely, Marcus realized something that made him smile for the first time in hours. The discrepancies Richard's people had found were real, but they weren't the result of fraud or deception. They were the result of a bureaucratic error that had been corrected years ago through proper legal channels, a correction that was documented in files the Whitmores clearly hadn't been able to access. More importantly, the very existence of these documents proved that Richard Whitmore had been using federal resources for personal vendettas, accessing databases and records that required specific legal justifications. The immigration documents alone would have required involvement from Homeland Security, while the employment records suggested access to Department of Education databases. Marcus gathered the papers and walked to his scanner, feeding each page through with methodical precision. If the Whitmores wanted to play a game of mutually assured destruction, he was prepared to escalate. But unlike them, he wouldn't be using federal resources or illegal surveillance. He would be using the truth. The email to Jennifer Martinez wrote itself after that. Marcus attached the recording of the Whitmores' conversation, scanned copies of the documents they delivered to his door, and a detailed timeline of Karen's harassment campaign. He wrote with the clarity that came from absolute moral certainty, documenting how a federal prosecutor and his wife had weaponized the justice system against a family dealing with terminal cancer. As he prepared to hit send, Marcus's phone buzzed. Again. This time it was a call from an unknown number with a Virginia area code, the heart of federal government operations. Mr. Chen. The voice was professional, measured, and completely UN. The FBI field office in downtown Portland felt like a fortress of polished steel and bulletproof glass, its sterile corridors humming with the quiet efficiency of federal justice. Marcus Chen sat in interview room C, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching Special Agent Sarah Williams review the evidence he'd brought with methodical precision. Agent Williams was younger than her voice had suggested over the phone, maybe 35, with short auburn hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She wore a navy suit that looked like it came from the same federal dress code manual as her partner, Agent David Park, who'd been taking notes on a legal pad with the intensity of a monk copying scripture. Mr. Chen, Agent Williams said finally, looking up from the transcripts of the Whitmore recordings, in 15 years of investigating federal corruption, I've rarely seen a case this comprehensive. The unauthorized database access, the illegal surveillance, the medical record theft, any one of these would be career-ending. Together, they constitute a federal conspiracy that could put both Whitmores in prison for decades. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at her words, but it was tempered by exhaustion and the constant ache of worry about Sarah. He'd left her sleeping fitfully, her breathing labored even with the oxygen concentrator, while Emma stayed with their neighbour Mrs. Patterson, one of the few people in Willowbrook who'd shown genuine kindness during their ordeal. "What I don't understand," Agent Park interjected, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested Korean heritage, "is why you installed recording equipment on their property. That's technically illegal surveillance on your part." Marcus had been expecting this question. "I was desperate. Karen Whitmore had been harassing my family for months, and I needed proof of what she was doing. I never intended to record anything beyond her harassment campaign." "But you did record a federal prosecutor discussing the abuse of his official position," Agent Williams noted. "That recording is admissible evidence of federal crimes, regardless of how it was obtained." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. His technically illegal recording had captured evidence of massively illegal federal corruption. But before he could respond, Agent Williams's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at the screen, and her expression hardened into something that made Marcus's stomach clench. "Mr. Chen, we need to expedite this interview. Our surveillance team reports that Richard Whitmore left his office 15 minutes ago with 3 other federal prosecutors and a team from the U.S. Marshal Service. They're heading toward your neighborhood with what appears to be arrest warrants." The coffee cup slipped from Marcus's fingers, clattering against the metal table. "Arrest warrants? For what?" Agent Park was already standing, gathering the evidence. "Files with urgent efficiency. Whitmore's moved faster than we anticipated. He's likely filed federal charges against you, probably immigration fraud, given the documents they delivered to your house last night. If he can get you arrested and processed through the federal system, it becomes much harder to pursue corruption charges against him." "But the charges would be false," Marcus protested, his mind racing through the implications. The immigration issues were clerical errors that were corrected years ago. Truth is irrelevant if you're sitting in federal detention while your wife. Agent Williams didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. If Marcus was arrested on federal charges, he could be held for days or weeks before the truth emerged. Days or weeks that Sarah didn't have. Agent Williams's phone rang, the harsh electronic sound cutting through the tension like a fire alarm. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with authority. "Williams." "What?" "Are you certain?" "We are en route." She hung up and turned to Marcus with an expression that mixed urgency with something that might have been admiration. "Mr. Chen, your journalist friend Jennifer Martinez didn't wait for our investigation to conclude. Her article about the Whitmores just went live on the Washington Post website. Every major news network is picking it up." Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. Article. Agent Park was already pulling up the Washington Post website on his tablet. The headline stark in bold typeface, "Federal Prosecutor Weaponizes Justice System Against Family Dealing with Terminal Cancer." The article was devastating in its thoroughness. Jennifer Martinez had combined Marcus's evidence with her own investigative resources, documenting not just the Whitmore case but a pattern of similar abuses throughout Richard's career. The illegal database access, the medical record theft, the surveillance campaign, all of it laid out with the precision of a federal indictment. But the most damaging element was the human angle. Martinez had interviewed Sarah's oncologist, who confirmed that someone had illegally accessed her medical records. She'd spoken with Emma's teacher, who described the 7-year-old's anxiety about the mean neighbors. Most powerfully, she'd included excerpts from the recording of Richard and Karen discussing the destruction of a family as if it were a chess game. "This changes everything," Agent Williams said, already moving toward the door. "Whitmore can't arrest you now. It would look like retaliation for whistleblowing. But it also means he's desperate, and desperate federal prosecutors are dangerous." As they hurried through the federal building's corridors, Marcus's phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, friend requests from strangers, the digital avalanche that accompanied viral news stories. But one notification stood out, a call from Westfield High School's principal. Marcus answered as they reached the parking garage. "Mr. Chen, this is Principal Stevens. I need you to come to the school immediately. We've had federal agents here asking questions about your employment, and Emma's been asking for you. She seems very upset." The world crystallized into sharp focus. Richard Whitmore might not be able to arrest Marcus without looking like he was retaliating, but he could still threaten Emma, interview her about her father's criminal activities, traumatize her with questions about immigration status and family finances. "I'm on my way," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. Agent Williams had heard enough of the conversation to understand. "We'll follow you there. If Whitmore's people are questioning your daughter, they're violating protocol. Federal agents don't interview minor children without parental consent except in extreme circumstances." The drive to Westfield High School felt like traveling through a nightmare landscape where familiar suburban streets had become a battlefield. Marcus followed Agent Williams's unmarked sedan through neighborhoods where he'd once felt safe, past houses where neighbors had already begun to choose sides in a conflict they'd learned about through social media rather than lived experience. The school parking lot was chaos. News vans had arrived ahead of them. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Reporters clustered around the main entrance, while federal vehicles formed an ominous line near the administrative building. Marcus parked and ran toward the school, pushing through the crowd of journalists shouting questions about corruption and courage. Agent Williams and Agent Park flanked him, their federal credentials creating a path through the media scrum. Inside the school, Principal Stevens met them with the harried expression of an educator who'd suddenly found his institution at the center of a federal investigation. "Mr. Chen, thank God you're here. Emma's in my office, and she's been asking for you ever since the federal agents arrived." "What federal agents?" Agent Williams demanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Who authorized questioning of a minor?" Principal Stevens looked confused. "They said they were from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Something about verifying Mr. Chen's legal status and Emma's custody situation. But they've been here for 2 hours, and they won't let me contact her father." Marcus felt rage explode through his chest like molten metal. Richard Whitmore had escalated beyond illegal surveillance and database abuse. He was now using ICE agents to terrorize a 7-year-old girl whose only crime was having a father who'd stood up to neighborhood bullies. "Where is she?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that made everyone in the hallway step back. "Conference room B," Principal Stevens replied. "But Mr. Chen," they said. Marcus was already moving, his purposeful stride eating up the distance between him and his daughter. Behind him, Agent Williams was on her phone, her voice sharp with federal authority as she demanded to know which ICE supervisor had authorized the questioning of a minor without parental consent. Conference room B had a small window in the door, and through it Marcus could see Emma sitting at a large table, dwarfed by the adult furniture and the 2 federal agents flanking her. His daughter's face was streaked with tears, her small hands twisted together in her lap as a woman in a severe business suit asked questions from a legal notepad. Marcus burst through the door with the force of a hurricane. "Step away from my daughter. Now." The ICE agents looked up in surprise, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons before they recognized that the threat was a desperate father rather than a dangerous criminal. The woman conducting the interview, Agent Rodriguez, according to her badge, stood slowly, her expression cautious but not hostile. "Mr. Chen, I presume? We are conducting a routine immigration compliance." Marcus Chen stood on his back deck, watching Emma's swimming instructor guide her through the butterfly stroke in the crystal clear water that reflected the late spring sunshine. The pool company had finished the restoration 2 weeks ago, a complete renovation funded by the settlement from the Whitmore's insurance company, and a substantial donation from the Legal Defense Fund that had grown beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. But the most important swimmer wasn't Emma. Sarah Chen floated in the shallow end, her once vibrant black hair now growing back in silver patches after the successful experimental treatment in Houston. The clinical trial that insurance had initially refused to cover had been funded by an unexpected source, the advance from Marcus's book deal, The Pool War, How One Family Fought Federal Corruption and Won. "Daddy, watch this," Emma called out, executing a perfect dive that sent ripples across the water's surface. At 8 years old, she'd grown taller and more confident, the trauma of federal agents and neighborhood bullies fading into a story she told with increasing pride about how her father had fought the bad guys and won. Marcus smiled, but his attention was drawn to the news van pulling up in front of the house across the street. The Whitmore property had been empty for 4 months, ever since Karen's conviction for stalking, harassment, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Richard's fall had been even more spectacular: federal prison for abuse of power, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. Their house had been seized as part of the criminal asset forfeiture, and was finally being sold at public auction. Jennifer. Martinez emerged from the news van, her cameraman following as she approached Marcus's back gate. The investigative journalist had become something of a family friend over the past months, her initial story about the Whitmore's corruption having launched her into national prominence and a Pulitzer Prize nomination. Marcus. Jennifer called out, her smile genuine as she entered the backyard. How does it feel to be swimming in victory? Feels like home, Marcus replied, gesturing towards Sarah and Emma in the pool. For the first time in a long time, it feels like home. Jennifer's cameraman was already setting up for the interview, the final piece in her documentary about the case that had been purchased by Netflix and was scheduled to premiere next month. But Marcus's attention was caught by movement in the Whitmore house's upstairs window. A young couple was touring the property with a real estate agent, their expressions a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Marcus had spoken with them the previous week, David and Michelle Torres, a teacher and nurse with a 2-year-old daughter, looking for their first home in a good school district. They'd been nervous about the house's notoriety, concerned about neighborhood reaction to new owners. Marcus had assured them they'd have at least one friendly neighbor. Tell me about the settlement, Jennifer said as her cameraman began rolling. The official amount hasn't been disclosed, but sources suggest it was substantial. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. Enough to pay for Sarah's treatment, enough to secure Emma's college fund, and enough to establish the Sarah Chen Foundation for families dealing with medical bankruptcies. But the money was never the point. What was the point? Marcus looked across his yard at the empty Whitmore house, remembering the morning when this had all started with Karen's accusations about water theft. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to prevent him from filling his pool, she'd ultimately funded its complete renovation. The point was that bullies can't win when good people refuse to be intimidated. The point was that corruption thrives in darkness but dies in sunlight. And the point was that sometimes you have to fight not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. A splash from the pool drew their attention. Sarah had managed to swim a full lap, her first since the diagnosis 18 months ago. Emma cheered from the pool's edge, her joy infectious and pure. Marcus felt tears threaten his eyes, remembering the doctor's words from 3 months earlier. Complete remission. The experimental treatment worked better than we'd hoped. And the federal investigation. Jennifer prompted. The Justice Department's internal review found evidence of corruption going back years in Richard Whitmore's cases. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. The investigation had revealed that the Whitmore's campaign against his family was part of a pattern. Richard had used federal resources to investigate and intimidate anyone who threatened his wife's neighborhood. Control schemes. 3 other families had come forward with similar stories of harassment and federal intimidation. 17 convictions overturned, 4 other prosecutors under investigation, and a complete overhaul of database access protocols, Marcus recited. Richard Whitmore didn't just abuse his power against us, he'd been doing it for years. We were just the family that finally had the evidence and the courage to fight back. Jennifer leaned forward. Any regrets about how it all played out? Marcus considered the question carefully. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and bureaucratic meetings. He'd testified before congressional committees about database security and prosecutorial misconduct. He'd given interviews to every major news network. He'd become, somewhat reluctantly, the face of ordinary citizens fighting institutional corruption. But he'd also watched his wife recover from what had seemed like a death sentence. He'd seen his daughter regain her confidence and childhood joy. And he'd receive hundreds of letters from families who'd found courage in his story to fight their own battles against bureaucratic bullies. No regrets, he said finally. But I hope other families won't have to go through what we did to get justice. As if summoned by his words, his phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made him smile. Mr. Chen, my name is Robert Martinez. A federal prosecutor in my city has been harassing my family over a zoning dispute, using his position to threaten us with false charges. I read your story and was wondering if you might have advice. We have evidence, but we are scared to use it. Marcus showed the message to Jennifer, who raised an eyebrow. Looks like your story is inspiring others to fight back. That was always the hope, Marcus replied, already composing a response that would connect Robert Martinez with the right lawyers, the right journalists, and the right advocacy groups. The network of corruption fighters that had emerged from his case was growing. Stronger every week. A car door slammed in the Whitmore driveway, and Marcus looked up to see the young couple, the Torres family, shaking hands with the real estate agent. The wife was holding a folder that probably contained a successful bid on the house. Marcus excused himself from the interview and walked to the fence line, calling out to the new homeowners. David, Michelle, congratulations. The couple approached with nervous smiles, their toddler daughter playing with a toy car in David's arms. Thank you for encouraging us to bid, Michelle said. We know the house has history. Every house has history, Marcus replied gently. What matters is the new memories you'll make there. And if you ever need anything, recommendations for contractors, babysitting, someone to help with yard work, we are right next door. The simple offer of neighborly assistance seemed to ease their tension. This was what communities were supposed to be, people looking out for each other, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating each other's successes. Actually, David said hesitantly, we were wondering, would you mind if we asked you about the pool maintenance? We've never owned one before, and yours looks incredible. Marcus laughed, remembering the morning when draining the same pool had seemed like the end of the world. I'd be happy to help. Pool maintenance is actually pretty simple once you know what you're doing. The key is keeping the chemistry balanced and the water circulating. As he explained the basics of pool care to his new neighbors, Marcus realized that the circle was complete. The pool that had started as a symbol of dreams deferred had become a symbol of dreams restored. The water that Karen Whitmore had accused him of stealing had become water shared with friends and family, used to celebrate recovery and resilience. Jennifer finished her interview and packed up her equipment, but not before capturing one final shot. Marcus, Sarah, and Emma in the pool together, a family reunited by courage and faith in the justice system's ultimate fairness. The image would become the closing frame of the Netflix documentary, a visual reminder that sometimes the small battles fought by ordinary people can change the world. As the sun set over Willowbrook subdivision, Marcus floated in his pool with his wife and daughter, watching the first lights come on in the Torres house next door. The neighborhood that had once felt like a battleground now felt like home again, not because the threats had disappeared, but because they'd faced them and won. The pool's gentle filtration system hummed quietly in the background, keeping the water clean and clear. But Marcus knew that the real filtration had happened over the past year, corruption exposed and removed, justice restored, and a community reminded that good people have more power than they realize when they refuse to be intimidated. Daddy, Emma said softly, floating beside him in the twilight water, I'm glad we didn't move away. Marcus pulled his daughter close, feeling Sarah's hand slip into his as